Hi everybody, old guy here with partner Tess. Um, I never ran across this book when I was a kid. Never even heard of it, in fact, until I was reading Tolkien. And, you read Tolkien, you get to know C.S. Lewis by default. Sort of how you know your parents' friends. But I did not actually read him until recently, and mostly his essays. I didn't read this book until very recently because when you're no longer a kid, you put away childish things. Generally. So, how did I miss this? Well, in the pre-internet Jurassic age, books were sourced differently. During my kid book reading years, which is about from age 7 through 14, I first read stuff that my mom bought, like the Dr. Seuss books, and whatever was available in the school library at B.C. Sweeney Elementary in Lawton, Oklahoma. Bookstores? No one I knew frequented them, except my much older beatnik, later hippie sister, who was all Bob Dylan and Sylvia Plath and drove my dad absolutely crazy. I remember I used to go into her album collection and pull out a Pete Seeger and go into the living room and put it on the turntable and crank it up, and about 30 seconds later Dad would come bursting in, raging and giving his impression of what he thought of that kind of stuff. Surprised those albums survived. That little school library, though, was a treasure trove. I mean, I guess if I went back there now, it'd be a dinky little room. Not that I could go back there now. From what I understand, they've closed that school. But to me, it was like this vast cavern of books. At that time, I read at least 4 to 5 grade levels above where I was, and was just voracious with what I could find. And in there, I would find things like the We Were There books, like this one here, which I snagged out of a thrift store a little while ago. And they covered all these historical events, and I just loved them. And Caddy Woodlawn, which I liked better than Little House on the Prairie books. And one that I remember quite fondly, it was a locally published memoir about some kids living on Fort Sill during the 1890s. I cannot remember the name of the book. I cannot remember who wrote it, but it was absolutely fascinating. When we moved to Alabama, my mom would drop me off at the Fort Rucker Post Library during her once-a-month commissary runs, because we lived like 40 miles away. And I would stack up as many Ray Bradburys and Asimovs and Nortons as I could carry out the door to cover the intervening weeks until we returned. And there was a bookmobile that visited my little school in Goodman about once a month, and in it I found all kinds of interesting stuff, including the Bruce Arliss's Full Circle that I had talked about recently, which is a very adult book and that my 12-year-old self shouldn't have read, but it just blew me away. And by the time we got to New Jersey, I stopped reading kids' books. I was 14, 15, and I turned to more adult stuff like Thomas Tryon and, of course, Frank Herbert. So I told you all that to tell you this. I never ran across the Narnia series. So never read it during my kid years, which is the time you should read it. Now, does that mean you shouldn't read it now? Depends. It is an excellent, rather delightful example, actually, of the kind of juvenile literature that the 30s and 40s produced. Rather staid, very formal, very correct writing, with heroic, plucky characters, always striving to do the right thing, and with the one exception of that one kid who doesn't. He's a rotter and a cad and doesn't know the proper way to use a dessert fork. Ugh. Now, I don't mean that this book is like an English manners book, all prim and proper. But it's in the sense of decorum, everyone having the right approach and way of doing things, and it's obvious that the literature back then wanted to present a type to which all kids could aspire. Lewis also breaks the fourth wall quite a bit in this book, which is very entertaining. And it feels like, instead of a book, that this is a long tale that your grandfather would spin some evening when the power had gone out and no one could watch TV. But more remarkably, it is probably one of the best allegories and summaries of Christian theology that you can read. Lewis makes the rather difficult concepts of atonement and redemption very clear, very stark, and quite simple. Kids can easily grasp it, and I guess that was his intent. So does that mean this is a Christian novel? Well, debatable. It's obviously the model, but the story can be read without any prior beliefs. An atheist can enjoy this. Now, like in all books, there are some annoyances. The style, for one. If you are not familiar with English manners books, then you'll find this ridiculously stilted. It's downright condescending in places. Lewis also gives short shrift to very important events, such as the epic battle between Aslan and the White Witch that Lewis dispenses with in about 3 paragraphs. Tolkien, he's not. Still, it's worth your time. If you happen to run across it, and you have some time on your hand. Old guy here. See you later. I guess I should have told you what the book was about. Silly me. I'm just presuming that everybody is very familiar with this plot and what it's about, but for the one or two of you who are not, this is the story of 4 siblings, Peter and Lucy, and Susan and Edmund, and they are sent to their, their uncle, I think it is? A professor out in the middle of nowhere to escape the Blitz, and while there, Lucy stumbles through the back of a wardrobe and discovers the magical world of Narnia, which is under the command, the control of the White Witch. And it appears that these 4 kids, they are the sons and daughters, the sons of Adam and the daughters of Eve, are there to fulfill a prophecy to break the White Witch's rule. There. Now go read it.